Distinguished Dean of the African Center for Strategic Studies, dear friends and colleagues, good morning. Let me first, being here in Washington, salute once again the historical visit that President Obama organized or accepted to undergo to the Africa Union headquarters. It was the first ever from a sitting president of the United States of America. And I think the exchange we had with His Excellency were very positive in fostering and reinforcing the partnership that we have with this great nation. Let me, from the onset, thank the African Center for Strategic Studies for inviting me to this very important gathering of senior leaders from the African continent and elsewhere to discuss security challenges across the continent and how to best address them. We are grateful to the Center for its continuous engagement in building capacity in this regard. And I personally consider this seminar as an exercise to galvanize our collective efforts to promote peace and security in Africa. Today, I would like to talk about some of the causes of conflicts on the continent, give an overview of the current security challenges, the African Union's achievements in response to conflict in Africa, and briefly touch on our future plans with a special focus on conflict preventions. Indeed, we have every right as Africans to celebrate the progress we have achieved during the long journey from Africa's liberation to unity, integration, and to peace and security for all Africans. The relatively high level of internal violence experienced in Africa and other low-income regions in comparison with more prosperous regions can largely be explained by 7 long-standing relationships or correlationship. The first and most important is the relationship between poverty and instability. Internal armed violence is significantly more frequent in low-income and low-middle-income countries than in upper-middle-income or wealthy countries. Secondly, times of change are inevitably disruptive, and the evidence shows that transitions from autocracy to democracy or adverse regime change are often unstable and prone to violence. Thirdly, as demonstrated in regions such as North Africa, a large democratic deficit has the potential to trigger instability. Fourth, there is a strong correlation, also often characteristic of poor countries, where countries with a relatively large youthful population that is affected by widespread exclusion tends to be more prone to violence. This becomes particularly acute if education levels, rates of urbanization, and unemployment are comparatively high. Sixth, once a country has experienced large-scale violence, the tendency toward repeat violence or relapse is strong. Similarly, there is a bad neighborhood effect of being close to or bordering on another countries experiencing conflict. Many of these factors, of course, are associated with the provision of poor governance, self-serving leadership, and the impact of exercise dependence on commodity exports and the associated implications. Ladies and gentlemen, today, as a result of the factors mentioned earlier, the state of peace and security in Africa remains of great concern. While significant progress has been made in resolving some conflicts and crisis situations, there are still a number of challenges yet to be overcome. The recent developments in Burundi, the crisis in Somalia, Libya, the Sahel region, or the situation between the Sudan and South Sudan, and South Sudan itself, to name few, are instructive in this regard. The continent continues to suffer from the insecurity and terror created by various terrorists and criminal groups, driven by different agendas, and operating at times as part of larger networks, including Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. What is even more worrisome is that terrorist groups have strengthened their ability to work together and criminal organization in a phenomenon known as motivational convergence. Motivational convergence, where criminal groups work side by side and reinforce each other. The crisis in Yemen and the ES phenomenon is also adding another layer to our concern. The lack of adequate screening of individuals fleeing from Yemen has raised fears that some extremists might blend with the refugees and sneak into the region. It is also believed that ISIS has attracted about 5,000 young Africans to join its rank in Iraq and Syria. These are not the only threats confronting the continent. Drugs and human trafficking, transnational organized crime, money laundering, and the illicit financial outflows are undermining peace and security in the region and must be confronted. There are also new threats that are emerging, and Africa is not equipped with the expertise and resources to deal with them. These threats, known as hybrid threats, includes bioterrorist threats, cyber war, demographic challenges, resources security, and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. The African Union is particularly concerned with bioterrorist threats. There are 24 conventional biological agents, including Ebola, anthrax, and typhus, plus an unknown number of genetically engineered organisms that terrorists or other criminals could acquire and unleash on an unsuspected public. The Ebola epidemic has taught us useful lessons, and the building of an effective primary healthcare system has become a national security priority for the member states. It is very likely in the next 20 years something will come along that is even more transmissive than Ebola. The possibility of a cyber attack by non-state actor against the IT infrastructure of our member state is also of concern. Although the IT architecture in many African countries is not well developed, many governments are increasingly relying on information and communication technologies for public and private sector transactions. So dealing with these new threats will require a comprehensive approach, allowing a wide spectrum of responses, kinetic and non-kinetic by military and non-military actors. Such as comprehensive response will have to be in partnership with other stakeholders, such as an international and regional organization, as well as a representative of business and commerce. Ladies and gentlemen, tackling issues of peace and security have always been at the core of the concern of African leaders, for they are prerequisites for the sustainable development of the continent. Sustained efforts have been made to strengthen the capacity of the continent organization to enable it to address the challenges of peace and security. It was against this background that the OAU mechanism for conflict prevention, management and resolution was established in Cairo in 1993. The aim was not only to develop an institutional mechanism of collective African action in matters of conflict management, but also to enable the organization to effectively address internal conflicts. But the scope and gravity of the conflicts that ravaged many African countries during the 90s, as well as their complex nature, soon revealed the limitation of the mechanism. It was necessary, therefore, to adopt the structure and the resources of the continent to the situation then prevailing on the ground. The efforts deployed in this regard also formed part of the plans to transform the OAU into Africa Union. It is in this context that the heads of state and government adopted in Durban, South Africa, in July 2002, the protocol relating to the establishment of the Peace and Security Council of the Africa Union, which entered into force in December 2003. The adoption of this protocol marked a turning point. Despite numerous challenges, progress has been made for the operationalization of the African Peace and Security Architecture, APSA, whose 5 main pillars, as you know, are namely the Peace and Security Council, the Panel of the Wise, the Continental Early Warning System, which is tasked to facilitate the anticipation and prevention of conflict, the African Standby Force, composed of standby multidisciplinary contingent with civilian and military component in their countries of origin, ready for rapid deployment, and the peace. And the last pillar is the Peace Fund. The Memorandum of Understanding on cooperation in the areas of peace and security between the Africa Union and the Regional Mechanism for Conflict Prevention, Management and Resolution articulates the guiding principles and modality for the full operationalization of the component of the architecture in such a way that they must be mutually supportive. Various instruments have also been adopted to deal with conflicts, such as the African Charter on Democracy, Governance, and Elections, to assist us to deal with elections-related issues, or the OAU Convention on the Prevention and Combating of Terrorism, adopted on the 14th of July 1999 in Algiers, and the protocol thereto, as well as the Africa Union Plan of Action on Prevention and Combating of Terrorism in Africa. Since the entry into force of the protocol, significant progress has been made in the operationalization of APSA. The PSC operational and has already met more than 500 times at the level of heads of state, ministers, and ambassadors, addressing most of the conflict and crises facing the continent. While most of the work of the PSC has focused on ongoing conflicts, this organ has also paid attention to the warring situation with a view to preventing them from evolving into full-fledged crises. In its work, the Council has also initiated thematic reflections on issues relevant to conflict prevention, election-related conflicts and violence, impunity, justice and reconciliation, as well as women and children in armed conflict. It has also undertaken preventive missions to a number of countries. It has also, in some of the retreats, we invite also the African NGOs and other civil society organizations. Key components of the continental early warning are already in place, and every effort is being made to ensure the full operationalization of the African Standby Force by the end of this year. As you know, an exercise codenamed Amani Africa 2 will take place in South Africa from the 19th of October to the 7th of November 2015 to validate the full operational capability of the African Standby Force and its rapid deployment capacity, RDC. The lessons learned in Mali and Central African Republic led to the establishment of the African Capacity for Immediate Response to Crisis, ACIRC, in French called CARIC, as an interim measure pending the full operationalization of the ISF and its rapid deployment capability. To this effect, our effort to operationalize ACIRC and the integrated it to the ISF is ongoing. The ACIRC is composed of voluntary nations, as you know, namely Algeria, Angola, Burkina Faso, Chad, Egypt, Niger, South Africa, Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda, that have pledged capability to the ACIRC. And to mention or to show that there is no contradiction between ACIRC, la CARIC, and the ASF and its rapid capacity, we are organizing maybe 1 or 2 weeks before the Amani 2 exercise, also the field exercise of ACIRC in South Africa. While we built long-term capacity for the operationalization of the ISF and its rapid capability, this has not prevented the African Union from addressing pressing conflict on the continent. The African Union's engagement in Somalia through the African Union mission in Somalia, AMISOM, and the support of various partners, including the US, the UK, and the European Union, has restored hope to thousands of Somalis and opened a new window of opportunity for peace in the war-torn country. For the last 3 years, we have also given greater importance to regional security operation between our various intelligence and security services. It is in this line that we established the Nouakchott process in 2013 for the Sahelian region and Djibouti process, which we launched on the 1st March this year, 2015, for the East African, both aimed at strengthening a relationship and cooperation between intelligence and security services in Africa. We even secured a secured communication system to allow the services to interact directly between themselves and alert each other in case of any danger. And we are hoping to very soon expand this initiative to the central and southern parts of our continent. Ladies and gentlemen, going forward, we will further strengthen our conflict prevention mechanism by developing country-specific strategies and ensure coherence at the strategic level, coordination at the operational level, and joint work at the tactical level with the UN and regional organizations through joint assessment, agreements on the type of interventions, entry points, and on who is best suited to address a particular conflict. In the immediate, we will be looking at enhancing our current mechanisms and seek additional resources to strengthen our ability to do conflict prevention in the following areas. First, in the area of early warning, we will build on the improvements that have been made in developing early warning mechanisms and establish regular and informal early warning dialogues between the African Union, the UN, and the regional and other partners. This will allow us to pool information and help us to anticipate threshold moments when key actors might decide to use violence. However, early warning is useful only if it leads to early action. And we will be considering a broader range of options for addressing and emerging threats, including seemingly small steps, such as multi-actor statements of concern or fact-finding missions, which can affect the calculation of parties on the ground early on. Second, we will look at structural vulnerability assessments. At the Africa Union, we believe that there is a need to address the structural or root causes of conflicts in Africa more systematically before a situation can get to a point of no return. Situation of marginalization, abuse of human rights, refusal to accept electoral defeat, manipulation of contributions of constitutions, mismanagement and unequal distribution of resources, lack of socio-economic opportunities, unemployment, as well as corruption, among other factors, are potent triggers of violence conflict in Africa. Our goal will be to avail to our member states the conflict structural vulnerability assessment tool as part of their national efforts to prevent conflicts and sustain peace and stability. This conflict structure vulnerability assessment report will serve as a basis for elaborating an appropriate country structural vulnerability mitigation strategy to address some of the issues that can lead to conflict. Third, we will look to strengthen national capabilities. We need to recognize that internationally led prevention diplomacy efforts might serve only to avert violence in the short term. Ultimately, only national mechanisms and institutions can sustainably prevent violence conflict in the long run. We will therefore continue to prioritize support to national capabilities for mediation, facilitation, and dialogue, and to assist our counterparts at their request in building national systems for conflict prevention. We must also improve the way we work with civil society, especially women and young people, who can be key agents for peaceful change. Fourth, we will need to equip better preventive diplomats. When the situation is at the high risk, we must invest in and better equip preventive diplomats who lead our efforts on the ground to avert violence conflict. We must reinforce our region liaison officers and expand our pool of highly skilled envoys who can be deployed rapidly to situations of concern, with a focus on increasing the number of senior female envoys and provide them with experienced and capable staff. Fifth, we are establishing a mediation support unit. Once on conflict has erupted, our envoys and mediators need to be able to easily and rapidly draw on top-notch thematic expertise. The soon-to-be-established mediation support unit will put together a standby team of mediation experts. The mediation support unit will also work on the training of staff to support senior envoys and mediators and eventually join their ranks. Six, we will be mobilizing more financial resources. Preventive diplomacy needs adequate financial investment to deliver results. In particular, with regards to rapid response capabilities, member states must ensure predictable and timely financial support. At the same time, we will continue our work to maximize the impact of the resources we already have. Lastly, will be strengthening partnership and developing stronger strategic dialogue. We see scope for a more strategic dialogue on issues of potential concern, as well as a more regular exchange of views and information on the working level. In crisis situation, we need to be able to decide quickly on who can do what to help. We know the issues. We have the necessary tool and the political will to address the challenges at hand. I would like to emphasize two important additional points, therefore. I conclude. First, let me point out the imperative need in dealing with conflicts and the fight against terrorism to uphold the highest standards of human rights and international humanitarian law. In this respect, the Commission is working closely with the African Commission on Human and People Rights and other stakeholders to further support Member States' efforts to promote and ensure the respect for human rights and international humanitarian law while preventing and combating terrorism. Lastly, the only sustainable way to address the threats I referred to earlier is to build strong, responsive, and accountable states institutions at the local and national levels that deliver essential services, as well as ensure inclusive political processes, rule of law, and public security. This is key to preventing conflicts and consolidating peace-building gains. In this respect, I am glad to note that the June 2014 Africa Union Summit and the Peace and Security Council have endorsed the report of the high-level panel on fragile states titled Ending Conflicts and Building Peace in Africa, a call to action, and requested the Commission to take the necessary follow-up steps. Let me conclude by saying that Africa is in transition, and that rapid economic growth and the improvement in most human development indices are expected to continue and go hand in hand with further declining levels of armed conflicts in Africa. However, as argued below, it is also expected that instability and violence will persist and even increase in some instances, reflecting the changing nature of armed conflicts in Africa and new dynamics that appear to supersede those of the Cold War period. Our challenge will be to ensure that the gains of the last 2 decades are not reversed, and that we will leave a better continent to our children than to one we found. I thank you for your kind attention.